the Tycoon, her boy toy, and a scandalous criminal cover-up. The small town of Havenwood was shaken from its quiet slumber one beautiful March day by the strangest wedding it had ever seen. From the edge of town, behind the gates of a magnificent mansion that had been silent for over 20 years, the thumping beat of wedding music suddenly echoed through the streets. The black iron gates, usually sealed shut, were thrown wide open today, adorned with a spectacular display of fresh flowers. A large sign announced, "The wedding of Catherine Vance and Ethan Hayes," forcing every passerby to stop and stare in sheer disbelief. Catherine Vance, a woman in her 60s with streaks of silver in her hair but a figure still remarkably trim, was a name few in town truly knew. She was a ghost, a legend known only by her title, the real estate queen of the plains. She lived a reclusive life, no husband, no children, her entire existence devoted to plots of land and soaring skyscrapers. And then there was Ethan, barely 23, tall and handsome. He was the widower of Leah, a poor girl who had died less than 2 months ago. Leah's death had been ruled a tragic accident. She was 4 months pregnant at the time. The flowers on her grave had barely wilted before Ethan was already walking down the aisle again with a woman nearly 40 years his senior. The town of Havenwood had never witnessed anything so bizarre. For a bright, young man like Ethan to marry a woman old enough to be his grandmother, there had to be something sinister lurking beneath the surface. Brenda, who ran the diner at the edge of town, couldn't help but shake her head in disgust. "His wife is barely cold in her grave, with his own child in her belly," she muttered to her customers. "And now he's rushing off to marry some rich old bat." You just can't fathom the darkness in some people's hearts. The whispers and rumors snaked their way through every alley in town. Megan, Leah's older sister, watched the spectacle from a distance, her hands clenched into tight fists. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she fought back the tears. She knew something was terribly wrong with her sister's death. Leah had always been so careful, with no history of fainting spells or dizziness. The very night of the accident, Megan had received a call from her. "Ethan's been acting so strange lately." "Megan," Leah had said, her voice laced with worry, "I feel like he's hiding something from me." The next morning, Leah's cold, lifeless body was found on the bathroom floor. The official story was that Leah, exhausted from her pregnancy, had simply slipped on the wet bathroom floor. But Ethan hadn't shed a single tear. He hadn't uttered a single word of mourning for his dead wife. Leah's funeral had been a rushed, heartless affair. None of her own family had been there to say goodbye. There was only a cheap pine box and a handful of cold, wilting flowers. And now, not even 60 days after his wife's death, Ethan was marrying a new woman, one with power and immense wealth. Megan had no doubts left. Her sister's death was no accident, and this wedding was not about love. It was a conspiracy, masked by fake congratulations and celebratory champagne. A trap had been set long before Leah closed her eyes for the last time. Amid the blaring music and clinking glasses, no one knew they were witnessing not the start of a happy marriage, but the curtain raiser for a horrific tragedy. The killer was gloating, thinking he had won. But the truth was only just beginning to claw its way to the surface. On the morning Leah died, no one in Havenwood knew a thing. Not until the piercing wail of an ambulance siren shattered the peace. Stopping in front of the small bungalow she shared with Ethan, people rushed out of their homes to see what was happening. A collective gasp went through the crowd as paramedics carried Leah out on a stretcher, her entire body covered by a stark white sheet. Ethan followed behind them, his face a complete blank. He was holding his phone, casually making a call to someone, his posture perfectly straight, his eyes vacant. He looked like a man who had just finished a household chore, not one who had just lost his wife. When Megan got the horrifying news, she raced over, her heart pounding in her chest. The neighbors were already gathered, buzzing with speculation. Some said Leah must have slipped in the bathroom because of the pregnancy, but others whispered, "Why didn't Ethan let anyone in the house this morning? He only opened the door when the ambulance arrived." Megan ignored their chatter. All she wanted was to see her sister, to pray it was all a terrible mistake. But when the hospital confirmed it, her world went numb. Leah was dead on arrival. The baby, a 4-month-old girl, was gone too. When the police arrived at the house, the scene was suspiciously clean. The bathroom floor was bone dry. Ethan claimed he was getting ready for work when he heard a loud thud. He said he ran in to find his wife unconscious and, in a panic, called 911 immediately. He put on a show of being devastated, suggesting his wife must have fallen due to a calcium deficiency or a dizzy spell. Megan looked straight into Ethan's eyes, her own filled with suspicion. Just a few days earlier, Leah had confessed to her. "Ethan's been so cold to me, Megan. He won't even touch me anymore. And he's always sneaking off to text someone on his phone. Sometimes I pretend to be asleep and I see him message someone, then delete the conversation right away." Megan had told her sister to stay calm, not to let such suspicions trouble her during the pregnancy. Now, it was too late. Leah's funeral was a sham. Ethan didn't cry. His face was as cold and hard as stone. The neighbors were all offended by his behavior. He acted like he was at a stranger's funeral. Mr. Henderson, who lived next door, remarked quietly, "He's not wearing any black. Not a tear in his eye. He didn't even hold a vigil. Just a single black and white photo of poor Leah on the mantel." In the picture, her eyes sparkled, just like they had in the ultrasound photo shed sent Megan just a week before. That night, after everyone had gone home, Megan stood alone before the makeshift memorial. She took a necklace from her pocket, Leah's favorite. They had forgotten to put it on her in the rush at the funeral home. She gently placed it by the photo and looked around the small house. It felt unnaturally cold. Not from the evening chill, but from the chilling absence of the person who had once filled it with warmth. Megan bit her lip so hard she could taste blood. She knew, with every fiber of her being, that something was wrong. A man who truly loved his wife and child could never be so cold. A happy, pregnant woman didn't just fall and die so simply. And if it really was an accident, why had Ethan been so resistant to letting the police examine the scene from the start? That night, for the first time, Megan wrote in her journal, "Leah, I swear I will find the truth. I don't believe for a second this was an accident." Leah's funeral was a quiet, somber affair. There was no fanfare, no procession, and none of Ethan's family was there to help. There was only Ethan himself, his face like a frozen mask, constantly avoiding eye contact with everyone. Kind-hearted townspeople came to light a stick of incense. Sympathetic ones stayed for a few minutes to offer condolences. But Megan sat by the coffin from dawn until deep into the night, clutching a small handkerchief her sister had hand-sewn for her. And then, the unthinkable happened. That afternoon, just as the sun dipped below the bamboo groves, a gleaming black luxury car slowly made its way down the narrow lane leading to Leah's house. A woman stepped out. She was tall, with an elaborate hairstyle, and wore an elegant charcoal gray dress. Her face was perfectly made up. It was none other than Catherine Vance, the famous Tycoon of Harmony Creek County. A woman most villagers had only ever seen in newspapers or heard about in hushed rumors. She walked slowly, but her eyes were as sharp as daggers. In her hands, she carried a large white wreath with a ribbon that read, "With deepest sympathy." Megan was startled, scrambling to her feet as Catherine approached Leah's memorial. Ethan emerged from the house, showing no surprise at all. On the contrary, he gave a slight nod of acknowledgement, as if greeting a familiar guest. Catherine placed the wreath down, bowed 3 times, then turned and said something to Ethan. Just loud enough for those nearby to hear, "Sad things will pass. Take care of yourself, my dear boy. We have much to attend to." The words struck Megan like a bolt of lightning. My dear boy. We have much to attend to. What was their relationship that an outsider like Catherine Vance could come here, call Ethan that, and speak with such intimacy? An old woman standing nearby grabbed her friend's arm and whispered, "Good heavens. How does Catherine Vance know Ethan? What's going on between them?" The other woman replied, "I heard he worked at her company a few months back." Megan strode forward, blocking Catherine's path as she was about to leave. "Excuse me. How did you know my sister?" Catherine turned, her gaze unflinching. "I never met her. I'm here for Ethan. He used to work for my company. He's a good man. And I'm very fond of him." It was a cold, crisp answer, but it dripped with hidden meaning. Megan clenched her fists. The way Ethan looked at Catherine wasn't the look one gives a former boss. It held something else. Something only a keen eye could detect, a mix of familiarity and a strange kind of dependence. That night, after everyone had left, Megan secretly retrieved Leah's old phone, which she had managed to take home. Most of the messages and calls had been wiped clean, but in the phone's trash folder, she found a voice message that hadn't been fully deleted. A man's voice, unfamiliar but firm, echoed from the speaker, "I already promised you. As soon as this is done, you'll have everything. She doesn't deserve to stand in our way." Leah had replied to that message with a simple text, "Who are you talking about?" That was all there was. But it was enough to send a chill down Megan's spine. Everything was starting to become clearer, but also darker and more terrifying than ever. The news of Catherine Vance attending Leah's funeral spread like wildfire. In a single afternoon, the story of the old billionaire and the young widower became the hottest topic of gossip at the town market. Everyone was curious. Everyone was suspicious. But there was one person who could no longer sit still. Mr. Gable, the owner of a small grocery store across the road from Ethan's house. Mr. Gable was a man of few words who lived alone. But he had a peculiar habit. Every evening, he would sit on his porch and watch the world go by. It wasn't that he was nosy. His shop had been robbed in broad daylight a few years back. And ever since, he'd become wary of strangers in the area. That day, when he heard the gossip about Ethan marrying a rich tycoon, something clicked. An uneasy feeling urged him to rack his brain, to think back over the last few days. And then, he froze. On the evening of the 14th, just 3 days before Leah died at around 9 o'clock, a black luxury car had stopped at the end of the lane. Ethan had gotten out, opened the passenger door, and helped a woman out. It was Catherine Vance. They weren't sneaking around. They walked side by side into a discreet little motel, tucked away behind a grove of trees. A place known for its privacy. They came out over an hour later. Catherine was wearing a wide-brimmed hat, and Ethan was smiling and chatting happily as he held the car door open for her. Then the car sped off into the night. Mr. Gable was stunned. He remembered that night clearly. It was overcast, and he'd had to pull down his awning in case it rained. Thinking back on it now, he could only shake his head. A young man like that, going into a motel late at night with a woman old enough to be his grandmother, just days before his own wife's death. The very next morning, Mr. Gable found Megan and told her everything he had seen. As she listened, Megan's hands began to tremble uncontrollably. She was speechless. All the suspicions she'd harbored were now confirmed by an undeniable truth. She remembered Leah's tearful phone call just before she died. "Megan, he's been coming home so late. And he's always glued to his phone. When I ask, he just says he's busy with work. But I have a bad feeling." At the time, Megan had tried to calm her sister down, thinking Ethan was just under financial pressure. But now, it was all horrifically clear. Ethan was having an affair. And his mistress was none other than Catherine Vance. Megan could not stay silent any longer. She took Mr. Gable's story to the local police, along with a formal request to reinvestigate Leah's death. But the police explained that they didn't have enough evidence of a crime. An eyewitness account only proved a personal relationship. It wasn't legal grounds to reopen a case that had been closed as an accident. To investigate again, they needed concrete criminal evidence or a request from the husband's family to exhume the body. How could she ever get Ethan to agree to that? Megan left the station feeling defeated. But she refused to give up. That night, she quietly returned to Leah's old house, which was now locked up. She slipped through a gap in the back fence and climbed in through a partially open kitchen window. In the cold darkness, Megan used her phone's flashlight to search, believing her sister must have left something behind. And then, under a loose floor tile in the corner of the kitchen, she found a small notebook wrapped in a plastic bag. It was Leah's diary. On the last page, a single line was scrawled in a rushed, terrified hand. "I'm so scared. Today I overheard him on the phone with someone. The things he said were terrible. I don't dare write them here. But if something happens to me, I promise you, it was not an accident." With Leah's diary in her hands, Megan knew she couldn't act alone. Her opponent wasn't just Ethan, but also Catherine Vance. A woman with more than enough money and power to bury any truth. If she rushed to the police now, all the evidence could be wiped clean, and the truth of Leah's death would be silenced forever. So, Megan decided on a different path. She created an anonymous social media account under the name The Buried Truth. On it, she began to post the story piece by piece, detail by agonizing detail. She quoted from Leah's diary. She told the story of the cheating young husband, the wealthy, older mistress, and the mysterious death in the bathroom. At first, few people paid attention, but after a few posts, as the details began to connect, the online community started to take notice. People began digging up old articles about Ethan and Catherine's wedding, comparing the dates to the time of Leah's death. Public outrage began to build. And then, one night, Megan received a message from an unknown account. "I used to work for Catherine Vance. I know things. If you want the truth, meet me." The short message kept Megan awake all night, torn between fear and hope. But her gut told her this wasn't a joke. The next morning, she went to the meeting point. The meeting took place at a small roadside diner in Clearwater Township, not far from Catherine Vance's estate. The man waiting for her was older, with a weathered face and cautious eyes. He introduced himself as David, and said he had been Catherine Vance's personal driver for over 10 years. David told her he had known about the relationship between Ethan and Catherine from the very beginning. At first, it was just private dinners, he said. Then, he started getting called up to her office, sometimes staying overnight. "I knew right away it was trouble." Megan gripped her hands together, holding her breath as she listened. David continued. "The day your sister died, I heard Mrs. Vance on the phone with someone. She chuckled and said, 'That thorn is about to be plucked. You just need to keep your mouth shut.' 2 days later, I heard the news that your sister was dead." David looked down, his voice dropping. "I'm an old man. I didn't want to get involved, but I can't sleep at night knowing a killer is living in luxury. If you need me to, I'm willing to testify." "Do you have any other proof?" Megan asked, her voice trembling. David shook his head. "I don't have proof, but I can give you a lead. The night before Leah died, Ethan brought a strange man into the mansion through the back door. The guy stayed for about an hour and then left. I suspect he was the one hired to clean up." Megan froze. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place in the most horrifying way imaginable. Ethan wasn't just a cheater. He and Catherine Vance had likely orchestrated a cruel, elaborate charade to murder Leah. The wedding went on exactly as planned. Just over a month after Leah's death, the mansion gates were thrown open. A long line of luxury cars queued outside. Inside, the grounds were decorated as lavishly as a 5-star hotel. Megan watched from a distance, a knot tightening in her stomach. What she was looking at was a fake world, built on the blood and tears of her sister. Meanwhile, The Buried Truth page was gaining more and more attention. A local online newspaper even republished her story with the headline, "The Shocking Havenwood Wedding, a Love That Defies Age, or a Sinister Conspiracy." The article was taken down after only a few hours, but not before it had spread everywhere. In the middle of the wedding reception, David quietly approached Megan and pressed a small slip of paper into her hand. "This is the license plate number of the stranger's car from that night. It's all I can remember. Be careful." Megan quickly tucked the paper into her pocket. Her eyes never left Ethan, who was now bowing to kiss Catherine's hand amidst a roar of applause. The happiness they were flaunting was built upon a grave where the grass had not yet had a chance to grow. 3 days after the wedding, Megan decided to confront Ethan directly. She went straight to the mansion. Ethan received her in the back garden. The handsome face she once knew now hardened with a cold confidence. "Are you here to condemn me?" Ethan asked with a smirk. Megan looked him dead in the eye. "Leah died. And you didn't shed a single tear. Less than 2 months later, you married a woman old enough to be your mother. Don't you see that you're a monster? Completely devoid of humanity." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Who I marry is my business. Just because your sister died, does that mean I have to be a widower for the rest of my life?" And about that night, Mr. Gable saw everything. He saw you with her at the motel. Ethan flinched for a split second before quickly regaining his composure. That's just a ridiculous rumor. Leah's death was an accident. The police already closed the case. You need to stop clinging to these baseless fantasies. And you should know. I'm not an idiot. I know you're the one behind those posts online. I could sue you for slander. If you take one more step. Don't blame me for being ruthless. Megan laughed coldly. Slander. What do I have to be afraid of? The truth doesn't need to be hidden. Ethan sneered, leaning in closer. The truth is that I now have money, power, and lawyers. And you? What do you have? Megan stood up, her voice ringing with conviction. I have a conscience. I have a sister who was murdered. And I have time. You go ahead and live with your crime. One day, it will swallow you whole. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ethan alone in the garden. For a moment, a flicker of anxiety may have sparked within him. But then he smiled, convinced that he had already won. After the fiery confrontation with Ethan, Megan returned home in turmoil. She knew she was in an uphill battle. A war where money and power could twist any truth. But the more she was threatened, the more fiercely the fire of determination burned within her. That afternoon, she received a call from David, the former driver. His voice on the phone was shaky but firm. I think I have to tell you something. It happened about a week before those two got married. Megan went to his house immediately. A small, simple home by the river dike. David poured her a cup of strong tea, lit a cigarette, and stared off into the distance. I went back to the mansion that day to pick up my last few paychecks. The gate was locked, but I could hear Catherine and Ethan inside, yelling like they were in a huge fight. Megan held her breath, hanging on his every word. David continued slowly. I heard her say it clearly. Do you think I gave you this directorship for free? I gambled my entire reputation on this. I need to be sure there are no loose ends. And then Ethan replied. I did exactly as we planned. All ties have been cut. A chill ran down Megan's spine. She pressed him. Are you sure? Did they mention any names? They didn't mention a name. But then I heard Catherine say one more thing. It's done. So be quiet. If this gets out, I swear I won't let you go down alone. I knew right then they were talking about his wife. This was no longer a vague insinuation. It was practically a confession to a calculated conspiracy. David looked directly into Megan's eyes. I'm an old man. I have nothing left to lose. If you need me to testify, I will. But you have to be extremely careful. Ethan is not a simple man. Megan went home, her heart filled with both worry and a new glimmer of hope. She had a critical piece of the puzzle. At the same time, the buried truth page had truly exploded. An article about the twisted relationship of power and love had been shared over 50,000 times. A major newspaper contacted her, asking for an anonymous interview. She knew she was fanning a huge flame. And when it roared high enough, no one would be able to maintain their false facade. Megan barely slept that night. The next morning, she opened the box containing Leah's keepsakes again. This time, she noticed something strange. Tucked into the lining of an old wallet, she found a tiny slip of paper. On it was an unfamiliar phone number, with a small, doodled heart drawn next to it. An idea sparked in her mind. She decided to use a money transfer app to look up the number. When she typed it in and hit search, a name popped up. Ethan Hayes. It was his full name. Megan's heart stopped. Ethan had always denied seeing anyone else. But here was proof he had a secret phone number. Even more suspiciously, when she tried to call it, the number was no longer in service. Megan didn't stop there. She went to a large phone store in the town center, pretending to be interested in buying a SIM card with a similar number. After some friendly chat, the store owner confirmed that the SIM card for that exact number had been sold back to the store just 3 days after the death of a pregnant woman in Havenwood. He remembered it clearly because the seller, a young man named Ethan, had seemed remarkably calm. Do you still have the transaction receipt? Megan asked urgently. The owner rummaged around for a moment and then produced a small receipt. It clearly listed the name Ethan Hayes, along with his ID number and signature. Megan photographed the receipt, her heart pounding with both horror and relief. horror at Ethan's calculated cruelty, and relief that she finally had a piece of irrefutable evidence in her hands. She immediately sent the image to a journalist friend who was following the story. The very next day, a new article was published with the headline, "Husband Sells Secret Love SIM Card, 3 days after Pregnant Wife's Tragic Death, Covering Tracks or Just a Coincidence." The article spread like lightning, creating a massive wave of outrage across the internet. People began openly demanding that the authorities reinvestigate the case. The public pressure was mounting. That evening, Meghan's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared on her screen. "You only get one life. Don't ruin the living for the sake of the dead." Meghan read it and just smiled grimly. She was in too deep to turn back now. And she knew that they were the ones who were truly afraid. That night, after receiving the threatening message, Meghan felt no fear. On the contrary, she felt she had to act even more decisively. She stayed up all night, drafting a petition over 4 pages long. She didn't sign her real name, only the victim's sister. In the letter, she laid out the entire story, attaching copies of all the evidence she had gathered, the statements from Mr. Ride, Gable and David, the copy of Ethan's SIM card receipt, and the tear-stained excerpts from Leah's diary. In the letter, she wrote, "We are not accusing anyone of a crime, but there are too many irregularities surrounding my sister's death. A healthy pregnant woman does not simply fall and die. Her husband rushed to erase all traces of his past, then quickly married a wealthy older woman. We implore the authorities to reopen this investigation, to exhume the body and determine the true cause of death. If not for the sake of a human life, then please, do it for a child who never had the chance to be born." Meghan sent the petition to 2 places, one copy to the Harmony Creek County Police Department, and another to the news desk of a major newspaper in the state capital. As a precaution, she backed up all the data in multiple secure locations. 3 days later, she received a call from an unlisted number. This time, the caller didn't hide his identity. "This is Lieutenant Miller, Criminal Investigations Division, Harmony Creek County Police. We've received your petition. Would it be possible to meet in person to discuss this further?" Meghan could hardly believe her ears. She agreed immediately. The meeting took place the next morning at a discreet coffee shop. Lieutenant Miller, a young but composed man, treated her with the utmost respect. "Mom, if what you've provided is true, we could be looking at a case of premeditated murder. From this point forward, I must ask you to maintain absolute secrecy about all information. We will proceed with a quiet investigation." Meghan nodded. For the first time after weeks of living in a state of constant stress and isolation, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She was no longer fighting this battle alone. Meanwhile, back at the luxurious mansion, the atmosphere was no longer as sweet as it had been in the beginning. Less than a month after the wedding, the relationship between Catherine and Ethan had already started to fracture. Now that he had officially secured the position he craved, Ethan dropped the gentle, compliant act. He became cold, arrogant, and began openly rummaging through Catherine's financial documents and property deeds without her permission. One night, during an argument over Ethan's unauthorized attempt to sell a piece of her land, he snarled at her, "Don't you forget. To get where I am, I had to get my hands dirty. If I start talking, do you think you'll walk away clean?" The words stunned Catherine. She realized that the man she thought she could control had become a dangerous animal, a predator ready to blackmail her. Fear began to creep into the powerful woman's heart. She quietly changed all the passwords to her safes, revoked his power of attorney, and called her personal lawyer to rewrite her will, completely removing Ethan's name from her list of heirs. But Ethan was no fool. He seemed to sense the shift. That night, as Catherine turned off the lights to go to bed, she found an old newspaper lying on her pillow. It was an article about Leah's death. A single line had been circled in red ink. "Authorities have concluded that this was a tragic accident." Catherine sat frozen in the darkness, her hands and feet trembling. It wasn't a direct threat, but it was 1,000 times more terrifying. It was a stark reminder of the crime they had concealed together. For the first time in her life, the woman who had dominated the business world felt she had dug a hole so deep there was no way out. A few days later, on a misty early morning while the rest of Havenwood was still asleep, an unmarked car pulled up silently in front of Leah's old, dilapidated bungalow. The rusty gate was pushed open. Lieutenant Miller and a few plainclothes investigators stepped inside. There were no sirens, no commotion. The reinvestigation of the crime scene was conducted quietly but with meticulous care. The cold, silent house was about to reveal the horrifying secrets it had hidden for so long. Inside the frigid house, Lieutenant Miller and his team examined every corner. The bathroom, where Leah had allegedly slipped and fallen, was less than 100 square feet, with non-slip, textured tiles. A fatal fall in such a space seemed highly improbable. After nearly an hour of painstaking searching, a forensics expert discovered a minuscule shard of glass near the drain, suggesting something had been broken during a struggle and then cleaned up with extreme thoroughness. In the bedroom, under the bed, they found faint scratches on the concrete floor, a sign that something heavy had been dragged. Lieutenant Miller immediately called Megan. "I can't disclose the details yet, but you were right. This death was not simple. We are officially opening a criminal investigation." Megan nearly broke down in tears on the phone. At the same time, at the mansion, Catherine received a call from the county police, inviting her to the station to assist in clarifying some information. She was stunned. After hanging up, she sat in silence for hours. Outside in the garden, Ethan was casually practicing his golf swing, completely unaware that the net of the law was beginning to tighten around them. 3 days later, the investigation had a major breakthrough. Based on the license plate number David had given Megan, the police identified the mysterious stranger. The car was registered to a man named Marcus Thorne, a known felon with a record for assault, notorious in wealthy circles as a fixer for sensitive problems. Tracing Thorne's movements, they found security camera footage from a toll booth showing his car heading towards Havenwood on the night of Leah's death and leaving in the early hours of the next morning. More importantly, the same car was recorded entering and leaving Catherine Vance's estate 2 days later. All the links were connecting in a terrifying chain. With this new evidence, the investigative team decided to take the most critical step: exhume Leah's body for a new forensic examination. The order was issued in secret to avoid tipping off the suspects. That morning, the village cemetery was cordoned off. Megan stood there, her hands shaking, but her gaze was resolute. She knew this would be the last time she would see her sister's grave as it was, but it was the only way to bring the truth to light. When the coffin lid was opened, the forensic specialists began their work. And then, they found something foreign, wedged in the burial shroud, right next to the body's hand. It was a silver cufflink, exquisitely crafted, not something an ordinary person would own. Megan was shocked. She shook her head. "My sister would never have anything that expensive." The cufflink was immediately sealed and sent for analysis. A day later, the results stunned everyone. It contained Ethan's DNA. Not only that, but experts also found a microscopic fiber that matched the high-end fabric Catherine Vance often used to custom tailor suits for her close associates. And the most damning discovery of all, the metal surface of the cufflink held a minuscule trace of a powerful sedative. The answer was clear. The cufflink had undoubtedly fallen off during the struggle or while the killer was staging the scene. And it was the ironclad piece of evidence directly linking Ethan and Catherine's world to the crime. That night, Megan sat alone in her small apartment. She held the copy of the forensic report, a flimsy piece of paper that felt heavier than the stone that had been weighing on her heart for months. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Leah, I'm almost there. You're going to get justice, little sister." The cufflink, a seemingly inanimate object, had now become a ticking time bomb, ready to blow apart everything Ethan and Catherine had worked so hard to conceal. The very night the forensic results came in, Catherine received a call from a powerful friend in the government. The voice on the other end was quiet but clear. "There's an order out to freeze your assets. I hear they found a critical piece of evidence in that girl's grave, something that links back to you." Catherine hung up, a cold sweat breaking out on her neck. She couldn't believe that one tiny cufflink could escalate things this far. She stormed down to the living room, where Ethan was lounging on the couch, watching TV, looking as nonchalant as ever. "The cufflink," she hissed. It has your DNA on it. And the sedative. Do you really think you can deny it now? Ethan looked up. His eyes a mixture of mockery and menace. I'm not denying anything. But have you forgotten? The shirt I wore that night was the one you picked out for me. That cufflink was a gift from you. If I'm guilty, do you really think you're innocent? Catherine froze. A chill running through her entire body. She stumbled back, grabbing the arm of a chair for support. You're insane. You're trying to drag me down with you. Ethan smirked, rising to his feet and stepping closer. We're both past the point of no return. I still have the recordings of our conversations. The text messages where you told me to take care of Leah quickly and quietly. Who do you think the court will believe? A hired hand like me? Or a tycoon who wanted to clear the way for her young lover? Catherine took another step back. For the first time in her life, this powerful woman felt true fear. She had made a fatal mistake thinking she could control Ethan. Now, she was his hostage. Remember, we're on the same boat, Ethan whispered, his lips close to her ear. And if this boat sinks, we both go down with it. With that, he walked away, leaving Catherine standing like a statue. That day, she called her private lawyer, demanding he prepare the paperwork to transfer some of her assets overseas, but the lawyer refused. Your assets are being monitored. If you try to move anything now, they could charge you with illegal asset dissipation. Every door had slammed shut, backed into a corner with no way out. Catherine Vance knew she had to find her own path to survival. That night, she quietly opened a desk drawer and took out a miniature recording device, a gift from a business partner long ago. She hid it inside a pen holder on the desk in her study, a room Ethan often used to make phone calls and review documents. 3 days later, Ethan walked into the room. Just as she had predicted, he pulled out his phone and made a call, through a Bluetooth earpiece connected to the bug. Catherine heard the entire conversation. Relax. The old hag is scared to death now. She won't dare do anything. The assets aren't fully transferred. But I've got the deeds to 3 prime pieces of land. I'm out of here in a month. Tops. That bitch Megan is still stirring up trouble. But I have a way to handle her. If Catherine gets in my way, I'll spill everything. Leah died because I was following her orders. Not because I wanted to. Once this is done and the money's in hand, we'll be living the high life. Every single word was a knife in Catherine's heart. That night, after Ethan had left the room, she sat alone, backing up the audio file. Every minute that ticked by was another knock on the door from fate itself. The next morning, she didn't go to the office. Instead, she arranged a meeting, not with her lawyer or her assistant, but with Lieutenant Miller. The meeting took place at a small diner by the river, where no one would notice them. What am I here as? She asked, her voice hoarse. That's your choice. Lieutenant Miller replied calmly. A witness. Or an accomplice. Catherine Vance placed a USB drive on the table. This is everything I have. If you can save me, then save me. If not, I'm prepared to take responsibility. But that man, he does not get to live peacefully for another day. Lieutenant Miller took the USB drive without another word. But his eyes lit up. This was the final piece of the puzzle. An irrefutable confession. That evening, as Ethan sat in the living room enjoying his usual glass of wine, Catherine came and stood before him, staring at him for a long time. You know, they say that if you live an evil life, you will one day pay the price. Ethan scoffed without turning around. I've heard that 1,000,000 times. But I'm still doing just fine. Catherine nodded slightly. But you forget one thing. The most evil person isn't the one who strikes the blow, but the one who turns their back. Ethan looked up, a confused expression on his face. But by then, it was already too late. The next morning, the Havenwood sky was still shrouded in mist. The gates of Catherine Vance's mansion were closed and silent as always, no one knowing that a storm was about to break behind those high walls. At exactly 7:15 a.m., a convoy of unmarked cars parked quietly behind a thicket of trees not far from the estate. Plainclothes police officers, under the command of Lieutenant Miller, quickly moved into position. In his hand was an emergency warrant for the arrest of Ethan Hayes on the charge of first-degree murder. Just as Ethan stepped down from the second floor, a hot cup of coffee in his hand. The front door of the mansion was suddenly thrown open. Ethan Hayes. A man in plain clothes stepped forward, his voice authoritative. Ethan froze. That's me. What's this about? We are investigators from the Harmony Creek County Police Department. This is a warrant for your arrest in connection with a murder investigation. Ethan stood paralyzed. The coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. You've got the wrong person. I didn't do anything. He turned to run upstairs. But two large men swiftly blocked his path. The cold steel of handcuffs snapped around his wrists as he roared in desperation. I've been framed. I'll sue all of you. As he was being led outside, Ethan looked up to the second-floor balcony. Catherine Vance was standing there, her hands gripping the railing. They looked at each other, no words, no expression. Just a gaze from Catherine as cold and sharp as a razor's edge. At the police station, Ethan was initially defiant, denying everything. But as Lieutenant Miller laid out the evidence one by one, the photos of Marcus Thorne's car, the forensic report on the cufflink, and finally, the audio recording from the study, Ethan's arrogant expression slowly melted into despair. Finally, he slumped over the table and broke down sobbing. I was just following her orders. It was all her. She pushed me to do it. She said Leah was a thorn in her side that needed to be plucked. He had no idea that it was Catherine herself who had handed that recording to the police. In another interrogation room, Catherine was completely cooperative. She admitted her mistake in failing to prevent the crime, in letting jealousy and greed blind her. But she insisted that Ethan was the one who had planned the details and carried out the act. I accept any punishment the law sees fit. I only hope that the truth can be returned to the deceased. The nature of the crime was gradually revealed through Ethan's confession. It all started when Leah got pregnant. Catherine became agitated, constantly pushing Ethan to be decisive. During one argument, she had blurted out, "If she were gone, everything would be so much easier." That sentence planted a monstrous plan in Ethan's mind. He began to act cold, putting Leah under immense emotional distress. Then, he contacted Marcus Thorne, a fixer for the rich, and hired him to stage an accident for $5,000. That night, after making sure Leah was asleep, Ethan secretly put a powerful sedative in her glass of milk. Once she was unconscious, he signaled for Thorne to sneak in through the back door. Thorne violently shoved Leah in the bathroom, creating a scene that looked like a simple slip and fall. Afterwards, Ethan personally cleaned up every trace of evidence, wiped away the blood, and then called 911 as if he were completely innocent. A week later, he and Catherine went on a trip to relax. A month after that, they held their wedding. At the reception, he even boasted to a close friend, "I'm not a construction worker anymore. I'm the boss's husband. I won't have to worry about a thing for the rest of my life." Hearing this, even the most seasoned investigators couldn't help but shudder at the callous cruelty of a man who was only 23 years old. That evening, Megan was sitting in front of Leah's grave when she received a text from Lieutenant Miller. "We have them both in custody. Ethan has confessed to everything." Megan didn't cry. She just placed her hand on the fresh earth of the grave and whispered, "It's okay. Little sister. The people who hurt you, every single one of them, have been brought to justice." A gentle breeze rustled the dry leaves. Perhaps somewhere, Leah was smiling. The trial took place on a June morning at the Harmony Creek County Courthouse, drawing a massive crowd of locals and media. In the courtroom, Megan sat in the front row, clutching an old photo of her and her sister. She didn't cry, but her red-rimmed eyes seemed to want to burn the two figures who stood with their heads bowed before the judge: Ethan, her brother-in-law, and Catherine Vance, the once powerful Tycoon. The indictment was read, exposing the entire crime. Ethan was the mastermind who hired someone to murder his wife, Leah Hayes, to clear his path to Catherine Vance and a life of wealth. Catherine, though not directly involved in the act, was the one who suggested it, enabled it, and concealed it. Their motives were greed, selfishness, and an illicit affair that had erased all traces of their humanity. When given a chance for a final statement, Ethan only mumbled, "The defendant has nothing more to say." only that I am sorry to the family and to my unborn child. As for Catherine Vance, the woman who was once so arrogant before the media, her hair was now significantly grayer, her face pale. She spoke in a trembling voice. I will repent for my sins every day. I am in prison. Money and power blinded me. I will accept any punishment the law deems just. The final verdict was delivered. Ethan Hayes was sentenced to death for first-degree murder, with the aggravating factor that his victim was pregnant. Catherine Vance received a sentence of 20 years in prison for being an accomplice and for obstruction of justice. The courtroom was silent for a moment, then erupted in whispers. He got what he deserved. Justice is served. Megan sat in silence. She felt no triumph, only the release from an endless pain. She looked up, as if sending her gaze to her sister's spirit. You see, Leah, justice still exists. 3 years after that historic trial, the town of Havenwood had returned to its usual peace. Catherine Vance's mansion was now abandoned and derelict. Its iron gates rusted shut. The grounds overgrown with weeds. People said no one dared to buy the land. Ethan Hayes was executed, quietly, with no family to claim his ashes. Before he died, he sent a letter to Megan. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only writing a single signed, short line. I was wrong to choose that path. I could have had a family. Megan read it, then let the letter fly away in the wind in front of Leah's grave. Catherine Vance was serving her sentence. People said she rarely spoke, always choosing the hardest jobs in the prison's vegetable garden. All the money she earned from her labor, she sent to an anonymous charity that helped orphaned children. As for Megan, after everything that had happened, she did not choose to drown in the past. She used all of her life savings to establish a small foundation called Leah's Hope. The foundation provides legal support and assistance to pregnant women facing difficult circumstances, abuse, or abandonment. Every year, on the anniversary of Leah's death, Megan returns to sit quietly by the grave, now covered in green grass. She places a bouquet of white daisies on it, her sister's favorite flower, and tells her about the women and children the foundation has helped. I'm on my feet again. Little sister. I'm not afraid anymore. And I know, even though you're not here, you are the reason I am living a more meaningful life. The horrifying story had finally come to an end, but its echoes remain a costly lesson. No matter how cleverly a crime is concealed, a price will always be paid. And sometimes, the weakest person becomes the strongest, when they stand up not for themselves, but for love and for justice for the ones they lost. Thank you all for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Your support means the world to us.